2 weekends. That's all it took for Red Bull to destroy a promising young driver's confidence and potentially derail his F1 career forever. But here's the twist. Getting demoted might have been the best thing that ever happened to Liam Lawson. Meanwhile, Mercedes took a completely different approach with their rookie, and the results speak for themselves. Today, I'm breaking down one of the most controversial driver development stories of 2025, and trust me, what Red Bull did to Lawson will shock you. Let's start with the facts. When Liam Lawson was promoted to Red Bull for the 2025 season, it caught everyone off guard. The New Zealand driver had only done 11 races for Racing Bulls across 2023 and 2024, and here's the kicker. He actually performed worse than his teammate Yuki Tsunoda during that time. But Red Bull threw him straight into the deep end. His debut in Australia? Qualified 18th and crashed out in those brutal wet conditions that claimed multiple rookies that weekend. Not ideal, but understandable given the circumstances. Then came China, and this is where things get really ugly. Lawson qualified dead last and finished outside the points with a performance that looked absolutely hopeless. But here's what Red Bull didn't tell anyone at the time, and this is crucial. They had made massive setup changes to his car. According to Lawson himself, Red Bull opted for what he called a shot in the dark with an aggressive setup change. In his own words, in China, we took a shot in the dark with a setup to try and learn something. For me, I was under the understanding that it was to help me develop for the future. So let me get this straight. They gave a rookie driver who was already struggling to adapt a completely experimental setup on a car that Sergio Perez had spent months complaining was impossible to drive, and then used his inevitable poor performance to justify demoting him. That's not driver development, that's sabotage. Now, you might think this was just Red Bull being their usual ruthless selves, right? After all, this is the team that's notorious for cutting drivers loose without warning. Maybe Lawson just wasn't good enough, and they realized it quickly. But the evidence tells a completely different story. Since returning to Racing Bulls, Lawson has scored points in 3 of his last 4 races. That's 7 races total, accumulating 20 points. To put that in perspective, that's 10 more points than Tsunoda has managed while driving the supposedly superior Red Bull car. Even more telling, Lawson has outscored his Racing Bulls teammate Isaac Hadjar over those 7 races. So clearly, the driver they deemed not good enough for Red Bull was actually performing at a high level. Lawson himself admits his performances weren't perfect. There were a few things over that time that made it not smooth. It wasn't a clean couple of weekends, and by my own standards, they weren't good enough. But he also revealed something that changes everything about how we should view those 2 races. The preparation Red Bull gave him compared to other teams will make your blood boil. Here's what really happened, and this exposes Red Bull's entire approach as fundamentally flawed. Lawson revealed that he arrived at Red Bull with far less preparation than other young drivers who receive plenty of private practice. In a recent interview, he said, "If you look at how other teams have approached bringing a young driver in, and you look at the test days, the time in the seat, the amount of testing that, for example, Kimi Antonelli has done in the past before racing this year. We didn't do any of that. But it gets worse. Not only did they give him minimal preparation, but they also threw him into 2 of the most challenging scenarios possible. As Lawson explains, it was 2 weekends on 2 tracks I'd never raced at, one of them being a sprint weekend. And if that wasn't enough, they had reliability issues during preseason testing in Bahrain and more problems in Melbourne. So this kid was trying to learn a notoriously difficult car on tracks he'd never driven, with a compromised preparation, and then they deliberately made the car even harder to drive with experimental setups. The most damning part? Lawson thought he was going to get time to develop. I was maybe a bit naive, but I thought I was going to get longer and have time to learn. If I knew I was going to get 2 races, I would probably have done things slightly differently. This suggests Red Bull never intended to give him a fair shot. They set him up to fail, then used that failure to justify what they probably wanted to do all along, promote Tsunoda to the senior team. But here's how Mercedes proved there's a completely different way to handle rookie drivers. Now let's talk about Andrea Kimi Antonelli and how Mercedes showed the world the right way to develop a young talent. The contrast is absolutely staggering. According to Mercedes team representative Bradley Lord, Antonelli went through a rigorous preparation program of testing previous cars, exactly what Lawson pointed out he never received at Red Bull. When Antonelli hit his rough patch, failing to score points in 6 out of 7 races after Mercedes introduced upgrades that destroyed the car's balance, Mercedes took full responsibility. Lord explained, "We know that a rookie season has ups and downs, and it's full of learning. When the car has become more difficult, both drivers were lacking confidence. The key difference? Mercedes supported their driver through the difficult period instead of using it against him." Lord said, "Every human being responds positively to knowing they have the support of their team and the belief of their team. Compare that to Red Bull's approach where, in Lawson's words, they used his struggling performance with their experimental setup as justification to demote him." Mercedes understood that their car issues were affecting both Russell and Antonelli equally. The results speak for themselves. Antonelli bounced back with a stunning podium in Canada and has shown flashes of brilliance, including that pole position in Miami and a 4th-place finish in Australia. Meanwhile, Tsunoda has averaged a finishing position of 15th since his points finish in his 5th race for Red Bull. The biggest question hanging over all of this is whether Red Bull's treatment of Lawson was incompetence or deliberate sabotage. The evidence suggests they wanted Tsunoda in that Red Bull seat all along but needed a justification for the swap. Think about it. Tsunoda had 4 seasons of experience at the junior team. He was the safer choice for a struggling Red Bull car, and he was driving his home Grand Prix in Japan when they made the switch. Using Lawson as a convenient scapegoat allowed them to make the change they probably wanted from the beginning. But here's what this means for the future. Lawson has proven he's got the speed. 20 points in 7 races is legitimate F1 pace. The question is whether any top team will take a chance on him after Red Bull's character assassination. Fortunately, his recent form suggests he's rebuilding his reputation, but those 2 races at Red Bull will haunt his career prospects. For Red Bull, this approach is becoming increasingly problematic. Their driver development program used to be the gold standard, but lately, they're burning through talent faster than they can develop it. With Max Verstappen potentially looking at options for 2026 when the new regulations come in, Red Bull might find themselves desperately needing the very drivers they've been discarding. The most telling statistic? Lawson's 20 points in 7 races compared to Tsunoda's performance in the senior Red Bull car. It raises serious questions about whether Red Bull's car is genuinely competitive anymore, or if Max Verstappen is just performing miracles to mask fundamental problems. What do you think? Was Red Bull's treatment of Lawson justified, or did they deliberately set him up to fail? And how impressed have you been with Antonelli's development under Mercedes' approach? Let me know in the comments below. The 2025 season has shown us 2 completely different philosophies for developing young talent. One builds drivers up even when things go wrong, the other tears them down at the first sign of struggle. The results speak for themselves.